Hello and welcome to Gifted Underachievers, a podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. In this segment, James and I discuss a conundrum we've been noticing lately: math issues with the New York Times bestseller list. From that topic, it's a short slalom ride to our new concept, the C-Squared Fallacy. That is, correlation does not equal causation. We look at it from two angles: people who provide services to creatives, and creatives who need to hire professional services, like, say, an acting coach, to further their careers. Hope you enjoy.
It feels like there's lots and lots of people claiming credentials that they don't actually have.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, because, and I'm half joking that, so at any one week, there's 15 bestsellers on the New York Times bestseller list, right? And when you look at nonfiction, which tends to be a little bit more variable than the fiction one, it still isn't that variable. Like, you're going to see stuff that's been on there for a year or more.
Yeah.
So maybe 40 different titles make it.
Yeah.
And when I'm looking around at the number of developmental editors and ghostwriters claiming New York Times bestsellers,
Yeah. There's like a disconnect.
It's just, the math just does not add up.
Maybe their bestseller was 30 years ago that they worked on.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they touched it in the mailroom when they worked in traditional publishing.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm thinking.
That's what it sounds like.
And so for us, that our challenge is we have no control what an author, an agent, and publisher does after we're done with something.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to be judged, our worth is going to be judged based on those choices that they make that we have no control over.
Yes, if we allow that to happen, and I'm not saying we have any choice in whether that happens, we don't really, except at the point where we're educating. It's almost impossible to claim that a book made a bestseller list because a copy editor worked on it. That's not how it works. And that we do have no control. It's always up to the writer how far a book goes. It is not up to the editor.
Here's the problem. And then here's, these people are taking credit for work they didn't do because they're responding to a marketplace problem. This is the solution they've come up with. But the core problem is people are making choices based on a flawed metric, and we need to get creative organizations out and educating, on these kinds of things.
Yeah, and we as individuals need to educate and to understand that buying into this idea that having previously worked on a bestseller means you're special is you're doing the entire industry a disservice. It's the publisher and the writer who are special, and you help. You're like a midwife. Is the kid winning the Olympics because you were there at the birth? No.
Yeah, I've doctored as I'm at the OBGYN of 23 Olympic athletes.
Right?
So.
I mean, and people will go for that. People will fall for that as an advertising thing because they're like, well, shit, it'd be great if my kid was in the Olympics, Oh, maybe I better go to that OBGYN.
When it comes to hiring somebody to do something creative, there's a problem with how people evaluate what makes a good fit. In, the editing, ghostwriting world, it's thinking that things that happen well after our work is done have that much of a connection to what we do. But I think there's ways to expand it more broadly. So I'm reading this really nice, it's a fiction book, but it, talks about acting, and this person loses an acting job even though she's demonstrably the better actress. Because the other person has a bigger name, right?
Yeah.
So that you're making a choice to have the production be of a lower quality in order to have somebody who has a little bit more of a name
More
in it,
box
kind of
office.
thing.
Yeah.
And so it feels like it's about educating people outside of what we do on how to properly evaluate what we do without getting into the subjectivity of this painting is better than that painting or this book is better than that book.
Yeah, I like that. I think the word we're looking for is fallacy. It's a fallacy that this belief that if you only work with people who say they have worked on bestsellers, that your book will then have more chance of being a bestseller. It's a basic misunderstanding of how it works. It's like saying, a particular acting coach has mentored all of these people who are now A-listers, and it's a fallacy to think that it's because of the nature of his mentorship. That's probably got something to do with it, but the other part might be geographical. They all are able to attend classes in that area because they've all moved to Hollywood, which means they're more likely to become A-listers anyway because they've committed more thoroughly. It's kind of like the experiment or not experiment. There was this idea that kids who eat breakfast do better in school. And there was this connection. It was thought to be causal, eating a breakfast in the morning means that you're more alert during the day or whatever. When they looked at it again, it turned out to be a little more big picture than that, because the type of home where breakfast is available is the type of home also where kids get read to at night, where they have somebody saying, did you do your homework? The type of home where nobody's making breakfast or even having it available is also the type of home where nobody's getting read to and nobody's having their homework looked at, which means, they're not going to do as well. So it's like there's more than one thing going on.
Yeah, no, I think, yes, absolutely. There's that seeing correlation as causation.
Yeah.
Right, which isn't true.
Right. Correlation is not causation.
There's an assumption that people are making.
Yeah.
That's not true.
I wonder if we could call it the C-Squared Fallacy.
C-Squared?
Yeah, because then we bring in the two C's.
Yeah.
Correlation is not causation. Just an idea.
I like it. I think that we're going to have to define a little bit that in every one of our industries or domains, there are the A-listers, right? And we all want to be in the A-listers and we work hard, but the fact of the matter is there's still this gigantic middle.
Yeah.
You can earn your living and practice your creative thing. And that the zone of A-listers is very, very small.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a tendency of people to want to associate themselves as an A-lister in ways that are not generally that honest, by a market reality that association is very, very marketable.
Yeah. Okay.
And it gets reinforced all the time.
Yeah.
And it's the C-Squared Fallacy. Boy, I'll tell you, it's growing on me.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And it's the C-Squared Fallacy that there's a correlation.
That correlation is causation. And is it enough to say like the sort of analogy, people want to work with a great acting coach? Is it geographical? Is it that? Or do we need actually a specific person?
Right.
Example?
Is it the acting coach or is it the people who come to his class?
Yeah, and then maybe we can say why it matters. So we started approaching this topic from the angle of we have to educate people who come to us asking, where's your bestseller list? Whose book have you worked on that's been a bestseller? And we have to be able to say to them, well, depends on, what you mean by bestseller, but New York Times bestseller, none. And here's why. And here is also why people who are saying it might not be giving you the whole picture of what it means,
right.
What that means and how it's measured and stuff. And so there's that kind of one-on-one education that we're doing, but are we saying there should be a much bigger shift? Like this is not.
Yeah, I think we should put, I think, yes, as individuals, we need to be prepared to address that but I think too, that to the Reedsies and the Gotham Ghost writers and on and on and on and on, who are marketing based on this false premise, are these people ultimately getting what they're paying for, which is a very positive experience that leads to the best product, not the best outcome for that product, right?
Yeah.
And so, the people who are driving this thing need to be part of the solution.
Yeah. And it turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy because there's other parts of the system. Like, for example, okay, so Reedsy's saying you want to work with somebody who's worked on a bestseller. There's this sort of tail-eating cycle where the person who's worked on a bestseller uses that as a marketing tool, and then people who have the resources to hire somebody who's already worked on a bestseller also have the resources to network, position themselves, take like really high-end group coaching that gets them in to see agents and stuff, go to conferences, all that stuff. Like, it's part of a bigger, it comes down to resource. Again, like the fact that the people with resources have the better chance. And yeah, I guess that makes sense, but it's also something that we're talking about in Gifted Underachievers that we talked about quite a lot at the beginning. It's really key that there's artistic value is just not about who you know. That's the idea.
We have to acknowledge that just as a function of reality, that there are going to be people who are either going to be born into or end up with advantages. That's just reality.
Yeah.
But we can bring some truth to the story of this. And so maybe the thing that's going to be the most value to our listener is, here's how you position yourself when you're talking to a potential client. When they say, well, what galleries do you show in New York, or what's your New York Times bestseller or whatever? Here's the response, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's valuable to the listener. And then the other piece, though, too, is the larger appeal to educate people and saying you're suffering the C-Squared fallacy.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when somebody goes to anybody who represents creatives for all these different kinds of functions that you can potentially do, what they're really offering is, I can align you with somebody who can give you the best product, right?
Yeah.
Which gives you the best chance of succeeding at whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah. The C-Squared Fallacy, even if we come up with a different name for it, I really think it's important because it applies to so many aspects. And the part where I think we can really lean in is not just the sort of, the part where, yes, educate the people that you work with, or, consider if you are an agenting body like Reedsy, they're basically an agent, reconsider your marketing to stop privileging this fallacy, because that's just out of sheer self-interest. And then also keep in mind that the fallacy itself reinforces privilege, as in people with resources are the ones who can afford to hire the people who say, I've got 66 bestsellers, that I corrected the commas on.
But then the other thing is then say, okay, so what are the metrics that you should look at?
And then, so if we're not looking at it from the perspective of we want somebody to hire us, we're looking at it from a creative industry perspective. What metrics should they be looking like? Say you're an actor and you want to be an A-lister, and you want to
how do we broaden that out?
What metrics should they be like? What metrics should really be considered? What is the most valuable thing an actor can do to further their career if they cannot afford to go work with this particular coach that has produced a bunch of A-listers?
Yeah. Or if they're looking, I've got a limited budget, I need an acting coach to improve my skill set.
Yes. Yeah.
So what are the metrics? Should I base it on, what are those metrics I should be looking for in a coach?
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a limited budget. I need an acting coach. What metrics should I be looking at? If I'm not looking at, you ever mentored Jodie Foster, say, or, there's a guy I really love, I forgot. Oh, anyway, it doesn't matter. If I'm not looking for that particular person, what am I looking for?
Yeah. And I think we can do that for just about everybody. I'm a gallery but it wouldn't be necessarily gallery, right? It'd be, I want to commission a portraitist or a muralist. What am I looking for? I'm the author. I just finished a book and I need a really good editor. What am I looking for?
Yeah. Okay. Sort of. Because we're hedging into are these clients or are these creatives? I guess they're both. So they're
Both.
creative clients.
Yeah, we're sitting on both sides of our world here.
Yeah, yeah.
So, the author is trying, okay, so you've made me now suspect of all of these editors that I've been considering. What should I actually be looking at as a creative, looking for that person, that professional?
If you're not using their previous client list as a metric, for example, I hired this coach for 3 months. I was just like, oh, she's just a person like me. I just need a bit of accountability. That's all I'm really paying for. She knows a fuckload more than I do. And I'm like, yay, I didn't waste my money, so how did I make that decision? I'd have to actually think back which part, not why did I take the plunge, but how did I land on her?
My argument, like, you've got to have that conversation. You've got to meet the person. You're not gonna define it from paper.
Well, that's your argument. That's how you work, but that's not necessarily what I did to land on her. I looked at what she'd written, how many genres she'd written in. She'd written 5 books, and they were each a different type: poetry, nonfiction, fiction, guided journal, maybe memoir. But she'd covered all those bases. She'd done them effectively. She'd won prizes, and she had a really good container in terms of onboarding. And I had a 15-minute call with her, but it was not that my decision had already been made. It was a batshit call for me to just check if she was mental.
Right. I think that's really great how you just stated. I really do. And, I think between the two of us, I have tons of stories where people either didn't have all the glitzy stuff, yet proved to be far more professional and competent, and then running into people who have all the glitzy stuff and they really didn't, in the end, know what they were doing.
They didn't deliver.
Yeah, they did not deliver. So here's another point that maybe we can bring up in this C-Squared fallacy is that since we are in the service industry, the value is all perceived, right?
Yes, you're right.
And so anything that can increase your perceived value that actually has relevance to your ability to do the work.
Yeah.
And where the C-Squared fallacy comes in is people are finding ways to increase their perceived value in ways that do not speak to their ability to do the work. And achieve the goals that they're implicitly promising.
Yeah. Sometimes explicitly, actually, but implicitly for sure. Limited series, the C-Squared fallacy. Got James rip the.
I can see on Netflix they turn it into this thing where we're being chased by goon squads sent out by publishers.
The New York Times is trying to kneecap us in the ladies' room.
Yeah, Keanu Reeves, the hitman, trying to get us.
Thanks so much for listening to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. We'd love to know what you think. If you have some time, check the show notes and hop on over to our Substack page to leave a comment on the segment. In the meantime, hope you have a wonderful creative week. Until next time.